Okay, welcome to Psych 101. Today we're talking about psychological disorders. Okay, it's chapter 15. We're not covering the chapters in order. It seems like we skipped a few of them, but these are the ones we need to cover. Okay, we're going to talk about all of this. Okay, a bunch of different types of disorders. So let's just get started. That's just an outline. Okay, actually, before we talk about the disorders, I need to mention something called the DSM. The DSM stands for the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders. And it's the DSM-5 there. It's the 5th version. It might have changed, actually. Last I heard, it was on the DSM-5R, means revised. It might be on version 6 now or something like that. But anyway, there's this big, thick book, really thick, okay? Thousands of pages. Big, thick book that's called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, which provides information about mental disorders, about psychological disorders, okay? And it uses 5 dimensions to diagnose mental disorders, like 5 rules, 5 things that need to be followed to help diagnose mental disorders. Now, I do want to caution you guys, this is just a book that provides information, a lot of good information. It is used by experts, by trained psychologists to help diagnose disorders. It is not really meant to be used on its own, okay? Because there can also often be some misdiagnosis, or there can be some disagreement about whether someone has a certain disorder or not, okay? So it's a guide, it's an aid. It's something that you should use without training is what I'm saying, okay? And I want to mention, before I get to the disorders, before I get to other things, I want to mention, well, how do you even know if you have a psychological disorder? How do you even know? I'll tell you about that in a moment. So here's some disorders here. Actually, I'll tell you guys now, but how do you know if you have a certain psychological disorder? Let's say like major depressive disorder, alcohol abuse, or specific phobia. These are just some examples here. It's a graph, right? Shows you how common some disorders are. How do you know if you have a psychological disorder, right? Well, here's the thing. What makes it a psychological disorder, what makes it abnormal, is if you have trouble coping, if it's causing problems for you. Like you might feel down, you might feel a little bit sad. That doesn't mean you're depressed. When you are depressed, it will cause problems for you. You know, you're more likely to struggle in school, more likely to struggle with your relationships, more likely to have problems at work, with others. It affects your life. That's what makes it abnormal. That's what makes it a psychological disorder. If you're coping just fine and you feel a little bit bummed out, that doesn't mean you're depressed. We all have anxiety. Even I have some anxiety. I have some stress, you know, especially when I'm dealing with my work. That doesn't mean I have a problem. How do you know you have a problem? Well, when it's causing you problems, when it's affecting your ability to function normally, that's when you know you have a problem, that you have a stress disorder, you have an anxiety disorder. And we'll talk about that. But here we have different psychological disorders here. And we have, females in red and males in the light blue, if you can see that, or light or kind of grayish. And the blue is the total. That's both males and females. And you can see that for major depression there, more females than males suffer from major depression. Lifetime prevalence, that means the chances that you're going to develop major depression, let's say, about 20% chance. In females, it's less for males, maybe like 13% chance. But you can see for alcohol abuse, there's a lot more males, close to 20%, who will have problems with alcohol abuse, alcoholism, than there are females. Phobias, those are things that have to do with an irrational fear, an excessive fear. I'll talk about that. Females are more likely to suffer than that from males. You have social anxiety disorder, more females. Drug use, more males will have problems with drugs than females. Post-traumatic stress disorder, more females are likely to have that problem. Generalized anxiety disorder, panic disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, dysthymia. Most disorders, you'll actually find that more females suffer from them than males. There are some disorders that males suffer more from, and it's telling which disorders those are. It's usually things that have to do with drugs and things that have to do with violence and just being awful, okay? Those are the ones that males suffer from. Females suffer more from like mood disorders and anxiety and things like that. And there are more of those than there are those other ones. So let's keep going. Here's just a how would you call this, a figure here that tells you that something known as comorbidity. See, you have here the first circle there on the left in the light gray. It's labeled as obsessive compulsive disorder. And then the light blue one on the right, that's labeled as major depressive disorder. Notice how these circles overlap. 41% comorbidity. What does that mean? Comorbidity. Co means together. Morbidity has to do with illness or disease. What that means is that if you have major depressive disorder, if you have depression, you probably, not probably, but there's probably a 41% chance that you also have obsessive compulsive disorder. If you have obsessive compulsive disorder, there's like a 41% chance you are also depressed. Here's the point about this. What this means is that disorders often go together. When you have one problem, there's a good chance you also have another problem. If you have depression, there's a good chance you probably also have an anxiety problem. An obsessive compulsive disorder is one of those problems. It's a problem that has to do with anxiety. That's what we often find with people who have psychological problems, psychological disorders, that they usually don't only have one problem. A lot of them have more than one. Okay, so obsessive compulsive disorder and major depressive disorder frequently occur in the same person. That's comorbidity. When you have depression, you also usually have anxiety problems. Not usually, but a good chunk of them, close to half, will also have anxiety problems. Some people just have depression, some people just have obsessive compulsive disorder, but a lot of them will have both. That's what that means. And I'll give you other examples of this as we progress. So let's talk about some of these mood disorders. And a lot of these, by the way, you've already heard about, okay? You're gonna understand what they are, okay? So I'll try not to spend too much time on this so we can get through the lecture. There'll be some weird ones that you're gonna have to pay a little bit more attention to, but a lot of these you've already heard about, like major depression, or just called depression. You probably already heard about that. You have some idea of what it is. Here are just some symptoms that are found on the DSM. Major depression is depressed, when you have a depressed or irritable mood. So you feel awful, right? There's feelings of worthlessness. I can give you a whole bunch of other things. So you feel awful, feelings of worthlessness. Often there are suicidal thoughts. There's often lack of appetite. You have trouble sleeping. You withdraw from people. You're grouchy, you're irritable. That's major depression. You just feel awful. You feel like you would rather be dead. And I'm not exaggerating. Okay, depression is awful. I've experienced it in my life when I was younger. And I can tell you that it is awful. You feel like you're the most worthless, miserable person in the world. You don't want to be bothered. You want to be left alone. You're grouchy, you're irritable. You often sleep too much or can't sleep at all. You don't take pleasure in just about anything. Everything seems just miserable and awful. It's the most common mood disorder, by the way, and we'll talk about a few, but depression is very, very common. As we saw in the graph earlier, about 1 in 5, about 20% of females will experience major depression at some point in their lives. That means they'll have depression to the extent that it will be debilitating. It will cause problems in your life. Not just you feel bummed out every now and then, because it's normal to feel bummed out every now and then. You know, it's just normal, okay? Especially if you go through a breakup or you lose a family member, someone, you lose a loved one. It's normal for you to feel awful for a while, but what happens is you get better. If you are depressed, you don't really get better. You feel awful and you continue feeling awful for months or even years. As a matter of fact, for you to have depression, you have to have these feelings for like at least 6 months. Otherwise, it doesn't really qualify as depression because we all have ups and downs. It has to continue. It's major depression and usually lasts a long time. It will last months or even years, okay, if it's not treated. Dysthymia is less intense depression that will last at least 2 years. Dysthymia is like when you're feeling down, you feel awful. It's not as extreme as depression, but it seems to last longer. Okay, it lasts at least 2 years, okay? I'm not sure that's even a different psychological disorder. It just seems like less intense depression, but it does seem to last longer. But even major depression by itself can last for years, okay? Let's talk about other ones. There's also bipolar disorder. And I'm sorry, you guys, I can't really show you guys the videos because it doesn't really work on Zoom. For some reason, a lot of people have told me that they can't hear it, right? There's audio problems. So I'm not going to try to play that, or some links. There might be some links there to videos that you guys can watch on your own via YouTube and stuff. But another mood disorder is called bipolar disorder. It's also called manic depression. This is when you fluctuate between two extremes, okay? There's alternating mania and depression. We know what depression is. That's when you feel awful, okay? When nothing brings excitement in your life, you feel miserable, worthless, you have suicidal thoughts and things like that. That's depression. We've talked about that. But these people sometimes feel depressed, and sometimes they also experience mania. Mania is the opposite of depression. They feel excessively excited. They're talking, they're shouting, they're basically, they act like they're out of control sometimes. You ever heard the word maniac? A maniac, right, is someone who's kind of out of control, right? Well, these people experience mania, okay? They act like maniacs. They're really happy and excited, and they'll party, they'll drink like crazy, they'll do drugs, and they'll be out of control. It's the opposite of depression. They feel wonderful. And then days later, they can feel miserable and depressed and suicidal. So they go through these two extremes. That's what bipolar means. Bipolar. Bi means two, polar means two extremes, two poles, okay? They can be normal in between, okay? You can have normal mood in between where, you know, if you catch them on one of their good days, you might not know that they have a problem. But then they might be depressed for days, and then normal for a few days, and then mania, and have mania for several days, and they'll go back and forth in this cycle over and over again. It just keeps going. They keep going through this cycle. Okay, let's keep going. There are, okay, so those were mood disorders. There are many more, by the way. We've talked about depression, dysthymia, bipolar disorder. There are other mood disorders, but those are some of the more common ones. Okay, now let's talk about anxiety disorders. Anxiety disorders are disorders in which, well, you're very anxious in one form or another. One type of anxiety disorder is called a phobia. Phobias are excessive, unreasonable fear of something. See, we're all afraid of things, right? We're all afraid of certain things. A lot of us are afraid of snakes, okay? A lot of people are just, you know, afraid of several things. We all have fears, but that doesn't mean you have a phobia. When you have a phobia, that means it's excessive, it's unreasonable. You are so afraid of something that it causes problems in your life. Like social phobia, fear of social situations. People who have a social phobia, they're so afraid of going out in public that they won't leave their house. They won't go to work. They won't go to school. They won't go anywhere. They are so afraid of social situations. That is excessive. That is unreasonable. That's causing problems in your life. Or people who have claustrophobia. Fear of tight spaces is what that is. They won't get in an elevator. They won't get into a small car. Into a crowded subway. That is abnormal. Okay, you need to do those things just to go through your normal everyday life. Or people who have snake phobia. Like I said, a lot of us are afraid of snakes. I'm afraid of snakes. When I go hiking, I go jogging, and I go through those hills, I'm always looking, make sure there's no snake in my path, right? I'm afraid of them. Most people are afraid of snakes, but I don't have a phobia. People who have snake phobia are so afraid of snakes. If you just show them a picture of a snake, they freak out. They get so scared of just looking at a picture, a snake on TV, a snake in real life, they'll run away screaming. That's excessive. That's unreasonable. Most of us are not that afraid of snakes, etc. There are many phobias. There are people who are afraid of heights, afraid of public speaking. There's people who are afraid of all sorts of things. Here's the thing, you can become afraid of just about anything. You can develop a phobia of just about anything. Why? Because phobias are usually learned through classical conditioning. Remember that form of learning, right? They are usually learned, and you can learn to become afraid of anything. As a matter of fact, go ahead, go on YouTube and look up some videos, and you will find that there's people who have all sorts of strange phobias. And if we were in class, I would show you a video of someone who is afraid of mustard. There's people afraid of pickles. You can become afraid of just about anything. That sounds really strange. But the thing is, you can develop a phobia of just about anything. but these are more common phobias. A lot of people are afraid of snakes. Some people have snake phobia. There are many, but these are fears that are excessive and unreasonable. Okay, they have to be problematic. They have to be unreasonable, intense, so that they cause problems in your life. Other anxiety disorders, panic disorders. Panic disorder is when you have recurrent panic attacks. So you keep having panic attacks. And here are some symptoms of a panic attack: a pounding heart, sweating, shaking, shortness of breath, chest pain. Those are just some symptoms. You actually feel like you're having a heart attack when you have a panic attack. But it's actually an anxiety problem. When you have a panic attack, it's usually because you've been so stressed out, so anxious for so long that you can't handle it, and you have a nervous breakdown, and you feel like you're having a heart attack. You feel like you're going to die. Now, that's a panic attack. Now, when you have these over and over again, then you have panic disorder. People who have panic disorder, they have panic attacks so often that they basically feel them coming. They know one's coming, and they have to leave the room. They have to stop whatever they're doing and go away somewhere where they can calm themselves down. They have them so often. Now, if you've had one or two or something like that, doesn't mean you have panic disorder. Even me, I've had a panic attack in my life. I've had one. I was just under a lot of stress when I first started college. I just felt awful. I felt miserable. I wasn't doing well. I felt I wasn't coping right. And, one day I went to sleep, and then I woke up screaming like somebody was trying to kill me. And, I realize now that was a panic attack. It's really what it was. But I haven't had a whole bunch of them. I don't have a problem. I don't have panic disorder, right? But people who have panic disorder, they have panic attacks again and again. And that, you can see how it would ruin your life. I've had students who have panic disorder, and I've given me their accommodation, right? Something that says they have a disability. Student has panic disorder and may have to leave the room at any time, right? That causes problems. You can't even be in the classroom when you feel one coming, and it's going to cause problems. It's going to make it difficult for you to learn, difficult for you to do well in school, difficult for you to have relationships, difficulty for you to keep a job. Okay, that's panic disorder. Another anxiety disorder is post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD, as a lot of you know it. PTSD, okay, a lot of you have heard about this. Most of you probably know what this is. This is post-traumatic stress disorder. And I'm trying to give you very brief definitions, because if you look these up, especially in DSM, you'll see there's a ton of information about these. I'm just giving you just enough so you understand what they are. So post-traumatic stress disorder is when you keep re-experiencing the emotions associated with a traumatic event. You've been traumatized. That's one way to put it, right? You've had a very horrible experience, and you keep reliving the experience. You keep having the anxiety, the fear, the nightmares associated with that traumatic event. So one example, let's say you've served in the military, and you went and you served in Iraq or something like that, and you watch people die in front of you. You were shot at. Maybe you were almost blown up, or maybe you were even, almost blown up by one of those IEDs. And now you're missing part of your leg, or you're severely injured or something like that. A lot of people come back with this problem, post-traumatic stress disorder, where they have this stress disorder. They're traumatized, and they wake up with, after having nightmares and fears. They hear, like fireworks, the 4th of July. And they think they're there again, right, at war. And they think that somebody's trying to kill them. Sudden noises can really set them off. That's post-traumatic stress disorder. Okay, you keep re-experiencing the emotions and the fears. If you didn't have it, you wouldn't overreact to those things. You wouldn't feel that way. But it's not just war, experiencing war, that can lead to things like that. Maybe you've been in a car accident and you almost died, and you keep having dreams and nightmares about that, and you refuse to get in a car or something like that. That's post-traumatic stress disorder. It can even happen to children. If they watch a scary movie, they can become traumatized, or traumatized from physical or sexual abuse. And basically it means that they're traumatized. They keep having the fear, the anxiety keeps coming back, and they keep having nightmares, right? That's what it is. And it can make people violent. It can make people feel like they're on edge. It's really problematic. That's post-traumatic stress disorder. Another one is generalized anxiety disorder. And by the way, the little asterisk there, or the little star or little flower, that was just a kind of cue, a reminder for me to kind of read you guys of a specific case, and then so we can talk about it, but we can't really do it via Zoom, can't do this live. So I'm just going to tell you about it. Okay. Generalized anxiety disorder is another anxiety disorder. This is a disorder where you worry excessively about many things. You see, when you have a phobia, there's a specific thing you're afraid of. When you have generalized anxiety disorder, everything makes you anxious. It seems like everything. You worry about many things. So you're restless, right? You can't relax. You have difficulty concentrating. You're very grouchy or irritable. Let me tell you more about this, okay? You basically worry about everything, even things that should be positive. Let's say there's the holidays are coming up, right? Let's say Thanksgiving's coming up, and you start worrying. Oh my God, what am I going to do? I need to, I need to get an outfit. I need to make sure I get the, I get the turkey, and I do all this stuff. And there you are, all stressed out and grouchy and anxious about this. You worry about work. You worry about school. You worry about your children. You worry about the home. You worry about everything. That's generalized anxiety disorder. You're always anxious. You're always worried, and you're grouchy. You're irritable, right? That's generalized anxiety disorder. Here's the thing about generalized anxiety disorder. We worry about a lot of things in our lives, right? A lot of us will have problems and we'll worry about things. People who have generalized anxiety disorder, they've gotten so used to worrying about things that they can't stop worrying. My mother had this for many years. She had a job where her boss was really mean, always yelling at the employees, always telling them to work harder and work faster. And she had that job for decades. And even after she retired, she had generalized anxiety disorder. She was grouchy and irritable, and she would always worry about things, worry about the holidays, worry about birthdays, and worry about everything. Over the years, she has calmed down, but you get so used to worrying that you can't stop, and you worry about everything. That's generalized anxiety disorder. And remember, it's a problem if it causes you difficulties at school, at work, in your relationships. If you cannot cope. We all have anxiety. We all worry about things, right? When you have this, it's a real problem, and it's ruining your life. Obsessive compulsive disorder, otherwise known as OCD. All of you have probably heard about this one. And the name kind of speaks for itself. You have obsessions and you have compulsions. The obsessions are pervasive involuntary thoughts. Let me explain that. Obsessions are things that you think about that you can't stop thinking about. They're pervasive. They're always there, these thoughts. They're involuntary. You can't control them, and they keep coming back. So an example might be you think your hands are dirty, right? You keep thinking, my hands are dirty, my hands are dirty, right? And those repetitive thoughts drive the compulsions. That's the repetitive behavior. An example might be washing your hands over and over again. So you keep thinking your hands are dirty, your hands are dirty, your hands are dirty. So you wash your hands over and over again. And then you feel better after you wash your hands. And then the thought comes back, your hands are dirty. And then you wash again. And then the thought comes back, and you keep doing this over and over again. And people who have this type of OCD, they wash their hands so much that their hands will begin to bleed after a while, because you're rubbing away the skin if you wash your hands too much. But there's people who obsess about their health. There's people who obsess about cleanliness at home or about their work. My wife has this about her work. She's a teacher, and she's always working. If she's not grading, she's looking at her lectures and redoing them, making them better. And then if she finds things extra time, she will actually reorganize all her papers, all her work, and she'll have this mess everywhere. And all she's doing is reorganizing stuff. That's OCD, right? Keeps obsessing about her work. She also obsesses about cleanliness, right? She rearranges things around the house. Just the other day, I was trying to find the Q-tips. I don't know where they are. Why? Because she moved them. They used to be somewhere, now they're somewhere else. She does that with a lot of things. If she ever has, she works really hard, but if she ever finds that she has extra time, all she does is reorganize things. And it drives people crazy. It drives her nuts too. She's always worried about stuff. That's obsessive compulsive disorder. But you can be about many things. You can obsess about, like I said, about your health, about safety, about all sorts of things. You keep having these thoughts that keep coming back over and over again. And that drives you to do certain things over and over again. And it becomes really problematic. It can be so debilitating, by the way, that there are people who have obsessive compulsive disorder to the extent that they can't even leave their homes. There was one case I've heard about where I actually saw a documentary on TV. This guy who had this obsession that if he took a step forward, he had to take a step back. So he had this thoughts, right? I took a step, I have to take a step back. And what does this mean? He couldn't go anywhere. He couldn't leave the damn house because he had this this OCD about movement. And he was basically trapped in his home. He couldn't get out. He wouldn't. And he was just so incredible how obsessed he was with that. And it would basically means he couldn't do anything for himself, right? That's an extreme example. You might have it in a lesser form if you have this. But if it's causing you problems, that means it's abnormal. All right, here are some, there are some disorders I said that are going to sound a little bit weird. Most of these you've heard about. Some of them are a little bit weird and you have to pay a little bit more attention, study a little bit more. We're gotten to the point of where we're going to talk about those weird ones. There are what we call psychosomatic disorders. Psychosomatic disorders are disorders where you have a physical illness that's caused by something psychological like stress and anxiety, a tension headache, an ulcer, or a rash, right? Those are just some examples. A psychosomatic disorder is basically when you have such severe stress, anxiety, that it makes you physically sick. You think of physical illnesses, usually of being due to something physical, right? Something you eat, or something you did, or maybe something bit you or something like that. But no, this is something psychological causing a physical problem is what this is. If you get very stressed out, you can get a headache. There's nothing wrong with you physically. It's basically the stress is making you have a headache. You can develop an ulcer, a rash. What happens is stress over time or severe stress can weaken your immune system. And when your immune system's weakened, you can develop all sorts of illnesses. You can develop cancer, high blood pressure, a rash, all sorts of things. Turns out that our mind can make us sick. That's a psychosomatic disorder. When something like stress and anxiety, and usually that's what it is, stress or anxiety, causes physical problems, physical illnesses. Now, there are some other ones that also are weird, and these are called somatoform disorders. And somatoform disorders come in different forms. It's going to sound like psychosomatic disorder. It's not the same thing. A somatoform disorder is when you have an apparent physical illness with no identifiable physical cause. So you think there's something wrong with you, but there's no evidence that anything is wrong with you. Keep in mind that with psychosomatic disorders, there is something physically wrong with you. Here, there is nothing wrong with you, but you think there is. Patients believe they're ill, but they have no physical symptoms. And it comes in different forms. And here are the different forms. Here's two of them. There's somatization disorder is one of them. Somatization disorder is when you have vague, minor physical complaints without a physical cause. When you complain of vague, minor things, but there's nothing wrong with you. It's all in your head, so to speak. So you complain of back pain, that your back hurts, that you're dizzy, that you have shortness of breath, or that you have a rash, but there's nothing wrong with you. There's nothing there. You may complain of joint pain, or that you have that you feel like you need to pee all the time and things like that. There's actually nothing wrong with you. It's all in your head. That is somatization disorder. You go to the doctor can't find anything wrong with you. That's somatization disorder. They're vague, minor things. Okay. Now, conversion disorder is when you have more severe, dramatic problems. Okay. Conversion disorder is when you have a dramatic, specific disability without a physical cause. So you complain about things that are extreme, but there's no evidence there's anything wrong with you. Going blind before a test. There are people who are so, so anxious about their tests, so stressed out about it, that they literally lose the ability to see. They can't see. But there's nothing wrong with their eyes. It is all psychological. And by the way, they are not faking it. They're not making it up. They can't see. But it's all because of stress. It's all because of something psychological. And I have experienced that, by the way. When I was first learning how to drive, and I got on the freeway, I remember I was with my cousins, got on the freeway, there it was fine and stuff like that. And it was getting, and then we were getting closer to an exit, and they told me, okay, exit here. So I exited, and then they're all talking to me at the same time, and I'm trying to drive. It's the first time I've been on the freeway, and I'm exiting, and they're all talking to me at the same time. I got so stressed out. I didn't know what to do. And they're telling me, oh, take the exit to the right, oh, to the left, and they're all yelling at me. And I told them, I can't freaking see. I can't, where is it? I can't see, luckily I was okay. I slowed down, but literally I experienced that for a moment, for like a second. I felt like I couldn't see. Okay. So I know that that's real, but there's other examples of it. There are people, for instance, who just believe they're so sick, so disabled that they can't walk, and there's nothing physically wrong with them. There's people who believe they're paralyzed. There's nothing wrong with them. I'm not saying that there's people out there, there's a bunch of people out there in wheelchairs who are not really paralyzed and they could walk at any moment. I'm saying that there are people who believe that they are paralyzed, people who believe they can't walk, and it's all in their heads. There are some people who have this problem, conversion disorder. There's nothing wrong with them, but their mind kind of makes them believe that, and then they can't walk, they can't move, they can't see, right? That's conversion disorder. So notice it is more dramatic, more specific. Somatization disorder is more vague. Otherwise, it sounds similar. Other types over here, there's also hypochondriasis. Hypochondriasis, that one you've heard about. It's, ever heard of somebody being a hypochondriac? Those people have hypochondriasis. This is where they interpret insignificant symptoms as a sign of serious illness. So they're always checking for things. They look at themselves and they might see that their skin is a little bit wrinkly. So they run to the doctor and say, doctor, I have cancer. And the doctor checked them, nothing wrong with them. They look at their tongue and they see little bumps. And again, they go to the doctor, doctor, I have a disease. There's something wrong with me. Nothing wrong with them. If they have a headache, they think they're getting a stroke or that they have a brain tumor. If they have, feel a little bit tired, maybe because for whatever reason they've been working hard or something like that physically, and they're a little bit tired, they think they're having a heart attack and that they can't breathe. That's hypochondriasis. Body dysmorphic disorder is different, and this one stands out. It's different and interesting. You're not going to get this one confused with the other ones. Body dysmorphic disorder is when they believe that there's something about their body or something about them that is so abnormal, so ugly that they have to hide it. So it has to do with the body. Body, and then dys means bad, morph means shape. They believe there's something about their body, something about them that is so hideous, so misshapen that they have to hide it. This example over here, like you believe your face is too ugly to show it. I remember the cartoon when I was a kid. I didn't watch the movie, but this image comes from the movie. The cartoon, very old, okay? Fat Albert, that's the name of the cartoon. And they made a movie about it. There's this character who's always wearing something like that. I don't know what you call that, a hoodie. No, not whatever. He's always wearing something like that, covering his face all the time. He refuses to show his face. He probably has body dysmorphic disorder. Doesn't want to show his face, believe there's something really wrong with it. That's just one example from the media, but there's other examples of people who, for instance, are always covering their nose with a book, with their hands, with something, because they believe their nose is so ugly and so big they don't want anybody to see it. Or people who always cover their ears. Or maybe their head with a hat or something like that because they believe their head is so ugly. Or there's women who cover their bodies. They always wear baggy clothing or very loose clothing because they believe their bodies are so ugly. They don't want anybody to see the shape of their body. So they wear clothes that hide the shape of their bodies. Those are just some examples. All right, let's keep going. Okay, we're doing good on time. I think we'll get through this. There's other disorders that are also a little bit weird. Some of these weird disorders are called dissociative disorders. Dissociative disorders are when basically something about personality, memory, or identity is split. It comes in different forms, but dissociative disorders means that some part of your mind, of your memory, basically has been separated from the rest, and that causes certain problems. One of them is called dissociative amnesia. Amnesia, you know, has to do with loss of memory. So dissociative amnesia is when there's memory loss without a physical cause. It's not like you fell and hit your head, okay, or you're taking drugs and then you can't remember things. No, there's no reason for that, right? There's no physical cause. So instead, what is happening usually is that you're undergoing a lot of stress, a lot of turmoil in your life, and then one day you lose your mind and you don't remember anything, or you don't remember who you are. And you say, who am I? Where am I? What the hell's going on? You literally lose your mind. You don't know who you are. You don't recognize anybody. A dissociative fugue would be when the person with amnesia leaves home and assumes a new identity. So usually what happens is somebody who's under a lot of stress, one point they'll lose their mind. They don't no longer recognize themselves in the mirror. They don't know who they are. They don't know who the people are around them, which is their family. They don't recognize those people anymore. They don't recognize their surrounding. And they leave because they don't recognize anyone or anything. They leave and they start a new life somewhere else. Sometimes they've been found away from home, you know, living a whole new life. And remember, they're not really faking it. It's not those people who fake it. That's different, by the way. The people who fake it, that's called malingering. But these people really don't remember who they are. You know, usually because a lot of stress, a lot of turmoil, and they lose their mind, lose their memory, so to speak. Usually when things calm down, they regain their memories. And then they look around and say, what the hell am I doing here? You know, and then they realize who they are, and then they go back home. It's happened to people. It's happened to, there's a case about a sheriff, right? You can know being a sheriff, being a police officer can be very stressful, very dangerous. Sheriff who every now and then he would lose his mind, and instead of being, you know, acting like the sheriff, he would become the outlaw type. And then he would go ahead and mingle with the criminals and become one of them. And kind of was, you know, and, you know, basically that's dissociative amnesia. There's another case of some old man who basically lost his mind one day, didn't remember who he was. He ran away from home, and then he was found in a nearby town selling tickets to a porno theater. They used to have those in the past. Not during my time, but in the past, they usually actually used to show pornography like in the movies. Nowadays, of course, everything comes through the internet. But those are just some examples, and that can happen. And here's one that you guys have heard about. And I can't show you guys the video, but you can find, you know, videos about this on YouTube, okay? And that's usually what I would do in class if we were doing this live, okay? There's also dissociative identity disorder, otherwise known as multiple personality disorder. All of you have probably heard of multiple personality disorder. This is when there seems to be different people living inside you, that you're sharing your mind with different people, and they take over at different times. Or if in the movie Me, Myself, and Irene with Jim Carrey, that's supposed to be a comedy. I actually haven't seen it, but it's supposed to be about that. You know, you literally feel like you are different people at different times, that a different person emerges at different times. And there's been cases of this where a lot of people who develop this disorder have actually experienced severe sexual or physical abuse. And it seems that basically what the mind does is that the mind creates a different personality to kind of handle the difficulties or the stress, the anxiety, the problems. And then the other one is driven underground, so to speak, to the unconscious. And so that person may take over at different times. and the other one is pushed out of awareness. And then maybe that one goes away and the other one comes out. You can have more than two, by the way. You can have 3, 4. That video there that I'm not showing you guys is about someone who had like 53 different personalities. Seems you have different people living inside him at different times. It seems kind of spooky, somewhat weird. But Freud's theory, by the way, Freud talks about the unconscious and the conscious mind. Freud's theory is the only theory that could account for those kind of things. How your identity, your memory, your personality can be driven underground to the unconscious, and different ones can emerge to deal with different situations. It's interesting, right? And we would know a lot more if we watch the video, but you've all probably heard about this. Let's keep going. There are other disorders. You guys have all probably heard of schizophrenia. Turns out there's different kinds of schizophrenia. There's more than one. There is disorganized schizophrenia, in which the person's speech and behavior is disorganized. And by disorganized, I mean it doesn't make any sense. Okay, so there might be disorganized speech where the person jumps from subject to subject, and they're not coherent. Their speech doesn't make any sense. They talk about different things. I don't want to. The time is right. You know, you got to seize the moment. Whatever it is, I can't even imitate it. Okay, but their speech is all over the place. It doesn't make any sense. And their behavior is disorganized. Their behavior doesn't make any sense. They'll be laughing for no reason, making gestures, giving somebody the finger, for no reason. Defecating, which is pooping, urinating in public. Now, I'm aware that there are homeless people who do that, and they do know what they're doing, and they try to hide that. These people don't know that what they're doing is wrong. They will do it right in front of people. That's disorganized schizophrenia. And by the way, with disorganized schizophrenia, there is something wrong with the brain. Okay, that's what the research shows. There's something wrong with the brain. There's also catatonic schizophrenia. Catatonic schizophrenia, that's what that image is showing you there. With catatonic schizophrenia, there is disturbed motor behavior. There are basically problems with movement. They alternate between two states. They can be in a catatonic state, which is what the picture is showing, where they're immobile, they're mute, they're frozen like a statue. They won't talk, they won't react. You can poke at them, move them, they won't move. Push them over, they'll just fall to the floor like some frozen statue. They won't react. And they may stay that way for minutes or hours. And then they can have what's called an active state, where they're the opposite. They're excited, they're talking, they're shouting. So one time they're frozen, the other time they're the opposite. Disorder of movement, that's called catatonic schizophrenia. It's really weird, but it does exist. Now, there's also paranoid schizophrenia. When you guys think about schizophrenia, you're probably thinking about paranoid schizophrenia. That's what was depicted in the movie A Beautiful Mind, which is a very good movie, by the way. Okay, a very good movie. So people who have paranoid schizophrenia, they have certain symptoms. They have these 3 symptoms: extreme suspiciousness. Like the FBI is after me. People are trying to kill me. The Russians are after me. That's the suspiciousness, where they think people are out to get them. And they also have delusions. The delusions are things that they believe that are kind of can't possibly be true. Sometimes they are grand delusions, where they believe things that are just way out there. So a delusion might be, I'm a CIA agent or something like that. I'm a code breaker, right? That was hired by the government to track down the Russians, right? I'm a CIA agent. And in reality, they're not, right? They have these delusions and they really believe it, by the way. They're not faking it. And then they may, by the way, some of them have what you call grand delusions. They believe things that can't possibly be true. There's probably someone in downtown LA who believes he's Jesus, by the way. When I was younger, I'd run into him. He was there. And there's always people out there who are schizophrenic and are delusional. There are people who believe they are Jesus. There's someone in Utah who believes he is God. And he has his group of followers, by the way, people who believe in him. He's probably just a paranoid schizophrenic. There are other people who have believed that they're Napoleon or Joan of Arc. or someone like that, someone who isn't alive anymore, but they believe that they are that person. They're probably just mentally ill, paranoid schizophrenics, okay? They also may have hallucinations, and hallucinations usually come in auditory form, right? They hear voices. That's sometimes that's what the hallucinations are, auditory hallucinations. Some will have visual hallucinations, but that's more rare, where they see things that aren't there, where they think they see their dead grandmother standing there talking to them. Or they think they hear the voice of God, or they see God in front of them talking to them. If you run across people like that, some of them do take on a kind of religious tone here. Those people are probably mentally ill. Okay? When someone claims to be God, they claim they're Jesus, they say that they talk directly with God and they behold God's face and voice and all that stuff, probably a paranoid schizophrenic. Now, I know there are those holy books, the Bible and things like that, where they talk about things like that. And I'm not talking about that, right? I'm not going to say anything about your religious beliefs, but I'm talking about people claiming things today, right? Those people are probably just mentally ill. And you have to be careful with these people because they can cause a lot of trouble and they can cause people to die. There was that guy, Jim Jones. He was a preacher. He believed the FBI was after him. He believed that he spoke directly to God and that God spoke to him, and he believed that people were after him. He moved his whole congregation to another country, and they all wound up dead. They all drank some poison, they all wound up dead. There's the Heaven Gates cult, right? These people who believed that they were going to be rescued by aliens and taken to a better life, they were probably being led by a paranoid schizophrenic. There's the Waco, Texas incident. There are these nutcases out there promoting conspiracy theories, promoting cults and things like that. And there are some people who fall prey to that, and it usually ends very badly. It ends in violence, it ends in death. Be very concerned if you hear about people claiming these things. They're probably just schizophrenics, okay? And some of them, like I said, have people who believe in them. There are people who also have undifferentiated schizophrenia. In other words, they have a variety of symptoms that don't fit any of the other types. There's also what we call residual schizophrenia, people who are under medication. A lot of their symptoms have gone away. They still have a few that's residual. They have a little bit of schizophrenia, but they're doing a lot better. There is medication for this, right? That can make them a lot better. They have to stay on the medication. If they get off of it, they will go back to being just as paranoid as they were. And by the way, they can also be dangerous. They can kill you if they think you're trying to kill them, okay? These paranoid schizophrenics. Let's keep going. Now we're going to get into some really interesting stuff, okay? There are also personality disorders. Personality disorders are when people have developed inflexible, maladaptive ways of thinking and behaving. Personality disorders are basically, just personality problems that people have developed. They've usually have had, difficult times in their life, very bad upbringing, very bad situations, or have been really bad parenting. And it doesn't mean that they've all been sexually abused or neglected or things like that. A lot of them have, but some of them actually, it's just that they've been spoiled rotten, or they've been led to believe things that aren't true. They've been given some very, very bad, they've grown up around bad people, bad parenting, and developed some really weird, maladaptive ways of thinking and behaving. And it's very difficult to change them, by the way. So schizoid personality disorder is one example. These are people who are, it sounds like schizophrenia, but it's not. These are people who don't want anything to do with people. They don't enjoy being around people. They don't want to be around people. They don't even have relationships. They don't care about sexual relationships or anything. They don't want to be around people at all. And here's the thing. They don't really, it's one thing for you to be depressed and lonely and stuff and to stay away from people that way. It's another thing to purposely choose to stay away from people. These people aren't lonely. They're not miserable. They don't want anything to do with anybody. They don't express much emotion, sadness, anger, happiness, nothing. There's very few activities that they enjoy. If there's activities that they do, It's usually things that don't involve any interaction with other people. That's abnormal. We are social. We want to be around other people. When we're not around them, we're miserable, we're lonely, we're upset. These people would rather do without people and don't need anybody. They really don't need anybody. They don't feel lonely or sad or anything. There's also paranoid personality disorder, which reminds me of some people, by the way, that I've heard of on TV, okay, and on the news. Paranoid personality disorder. It's going to sound like paranoid schizophrenia, but it is not. It is different. These are people who have pervasive, unjustified distrust, suspiciousness, people who believe that people are out to harm them, out to get them, out to screw them over. And the thing is, these thoughts are always, it's pervasive. They always think people are out to get them. People are out to spread lies about them, out to harm their reputation or do something bad to them. And it's unjustified. No one is trying to hurt them. It's not true. And they're always very suspicious of other people. And they may believe in conspiracy theories and all kinds of weird and crazy things, by the way, which our president has been promoting. And it's a very bad thing to promote stuff like that, okay? Paranoid personality disorder, right? When you are so freaking paranoid that you're promoting all this nonsense. And because you're a very important, popular person, you're the president, people believe you. And it's just not a very good thing, okay? But I have my suspicions, okay, about this person, right? They show these symptoms. But that's paranoid personality disorder. And it comes in many forms. And by the way, a lot of them are so paranoid that they can't even stay in one place. They'll move around from place to place. A lot of them are homeless because they just don't trust anyone when it's that severe. There are some people who are just paranoid, by the way, and may not have a personality disorder where it's that problematic, where it causes those severe problems. But remember, if something causes problems for you, right? If you are so paranoid and you believe in all these conspiracy theories, all these people out to harm you, all these people out to get you, that you don't get along with anybody, right? And that you have a lot of problems with people, you probably have a disorder, okay? There's other personality disorders. There's also dependent personality disorder. These are people who are dependent, okay? The name kind of says it all. These are people who have an excessive need to be taken care of. They feel helpless on their own. They have difficulty making decisions, difficulty expressing disagreement with people. They lack self-confidence, they're submissive, they're clingy. Let me explain. These are people, to some extent, that act like children. They need you to tell them what to do. They need you to take care of them and do everything for them. They can't take you saying anything mean about them because they will cry. They feel that, they're low, they feel that they're no good. They're submissive. They'll just, you tell them something, they'll just give in. If you yell at them, they'll just cry. They're just extremely dependent. They're like children. They don't know how to take care of themselves. They cannot. They need somebody to tell them what to do, tell them how to do things, tell them how to feel, how to think. And it's very, very abnormal. I've had a student like this, going through college, but yeah, she had this problem, and stuff like that. And it was just sad, but yeah, I need to be careful. I needed to be careful what I said around her, because she would very easily shake and start to cry for any little thing and stuff like that. But let me give you a better example rather than talk about my students, because I really shouldn't do that, even though I'm not going to tell you her name. But there have been many cases of this, of it's mostly women, by the way. It could also be men, but mostly women. There are women, for instance, who are brought up in a very strict household, and they're told what to do and what to think and how to behave themselves. And then when they grow up, it's just assumed that they're just going to get married, and they get married and they marry someone a husband who tells them what to do and what to think. And they're not really allowed to think for themselves or to decide anything for themselves. And they don't learn to take care of themselves. And then one day their husband leaves them, or their husband dies, because women often outlive their husbands. And there they are. They don't know what to do with themselves. They need someone to tell them what to do, somebody to take care of them, someone to tell them what to think, right? That's dependent personality disorder. It's not always women. The vast majority of cases, like over 60%, are women, but it can also happen to men. Now, there's also avoidant personality disorder, which, by the way, is still mostly women. There are some of these disorders that are more prevalent in women and some that are more prevalent in men. We'll get to the ones that are more common in men in a moment, okay? There's avoidant personality disorder, just people who are very avoidant, basically, people who are hypersensitive. They're extremely fearful of criticism, of rejection. So you always have to be nice to them, or they'll break down and cry. They're very fearful of being rejected. So they'll often avoid people and won't get involved with people. They feel inadequate, right? That they're no good. They feel that they're unappealing, they're inferior, that they're stupid and they shouldn't say anything, right? They have difficulty forming intimate relationships. They want to be with other people, but they're so shy, so fearful, so sensitive that they can't. They are really afraid. And because of that, they're often very lonely, but they want to be with people. They are so hypersensitive and so avoidant. They'll often be loners and consider themselves losers. And think about this. You probably have heard of people like this, have seen people like this. Some of these people you may be thinking about may have avoidant personality disorder. They're so fearful of people, so hypersensitive. They want to be with people. They desperately want to be with people, but they have difficulty forming relationships because of that. They will, get involved with people, but you almost have to guarantee them that you won't hurt them, that you won't leave them, that you won't do anything bad to them. And you tell them that, and there are no guarantees in life. Okay? But that's avoidant personality disorder. So where are the ones for men? All right, we'll get to those in a moment. Most of these are women. Borderline personality disorder. Now, picture of Britney Spears right there, right? I suspect that Britney Spears had this or still has it, okay? That showed all the symptoms. Borderline personality disorder is when you basically have an unstable or extreme self-image, mood, relationships. Let me explain, right? Basic. Let me explain. Your image is unstable. You change your looks constantly. Maybe your hair color, the way you wear your hair, your clothing and all that stuff. It's not just that you change your look constantly, it's also very extreme. You dress in provocative ways, or you have hairstyles that get a lot of attention. Your mood is also very unstable and extreme, very happy at some point and depressed and angry, miserable at other times. And you fluctuate between these extremes, and you might think that they have bipolar disorder, but they don't. They're borderline. It's different. Unstable relationships. They're with one person and say, oh, I found the man of my dreams. We're going to get married. Everything's going to be wonderful. And then 2 weeks later, they're with somebody else. And then that person's the one. Very unstable, very extreme. They're very impulsive and engage in self-destructive behavior, impulsive self-destructive behavior. With impulsive self-destructive behavior, I'm talking about promiscuity. They'll sleep with this guy or this person, and then that person, they'll do drugs, they'll mutilate themselves. These are the people, by the way, who cut themselves, okay? Or they'll cut their own hair like Britney Spears did. When Britney Spears did this to herself, and I know it's been a while now since she did this, right? That's when I realized, oh my God, Britney Spears had borderline personality disorder. Now I understand why she does the things that she does, why she's acting so crazy. When she did that, that's a form of self-mutilation. So is cutting your skin, okay? But the self-destructive behavior, right? Sleeping with people you just met, the drug use of this wild, extreme, crazy behavior, self-destructive behavior, and the unstable image and mood, that's borderline personality disorder. And I have met people like this, right? But Britney Spears seems to be one person in the media who, at the time, right, when she was popular in the 90s, she seemed to basically have all the symptoms. She's kind of out of the limelight now, so you don't really see this, but yeah, she definitely met the criteria. And she was getting psychological help for her problems. I think they diagnosed her with bipolar and something else, but I'm pretty sure she had this too, because, I mean, she had all the symptoms. Here's one for you guys. It'll get you guys thinking. Narcissistic personality disorder. And yes, that's a picture of Donald Trump. And I know some of you may like Donald Trump and you voted for him. I know, right? This being California, most of you did not. Most of you don't like him, but I do know that there's some of you who voted for him, okay? Because he is that popular. But here's the thing. Guess why there are so many problems with Donald Trump? So many scandals. so many difficulties, because in my opinion, and the opinion of many other experts, psychological experts, he suffers from what you call narcissistic personality disorder, the tendency to regard oneself as grandiosely self-important to such an extent that it is pathological. In other words, it is basically a mental illness. It's different than having high self-esteem, believing in yourself, preoccupied with fantasies of success, believe they deserve special treatment, react aggressively when their view of themselves, their ego is threatened. Now, let me say more about this, because this probably doesn't convince you that Donald Trump has narcissistic personality disorder. But think about the things that Donald Trump has said. He has said that he is the best president, that there's no one who has done the things that he has done for this country. He has said that he is so good looking that all women flirt with him. And think about that. He's an old man. That is not true. Okay? He doesn't believe the experts. He thinks he knows better than our most prestigious disease and health expert, Dr. Fauci. He thinks he knows better than him about the virus. He's fired people in the military. Why? Because they disagree with him. He thinks he knows better than all those people. If you don't agree with him, you're fired. You're out of here. If someone says something bad about him, he will say the most awful things. He is narcissistic. He believes there is no one that's better than him, no one who is smarter, more capable, no one who's been a better president, and you either agree with him or you get the hell out of his way. That is Donald Trump. And you can see the problems that it causes in his administration. He disagrees even about the election. He lost, and he cannot admit it because he's so narcissistic. Even with the Republicans that are on his side, he's disagreeing with him because it shows that he lost. He's even saying that they're out to get him, trying to screw him over. No, he's delusional. He's narcissistic. You have to understand that. Donald Trump has a mental illness. That's why he is so problematic. That's why he's not getting a second term, by the way. He is mentally ill, and people know it. They're trying to protect him. The people who are on his side, they won't speak out against him because he has so many people on his side, so many people who have voted for him, that if they oppose him, he will tell those people not to vote for them. And then those people will be out of office. Those people, it doesn't matter who they are. Okay? There is no one, in his opinion, that is smarter than him, more capable. It doesn't matter that he's not a disease expert, that he's not some military expert. He knows best. And you can see the problems that it causes. And he's firing people left and right. Has been that way for 4 years. And by the way, I'm not just picking on Donald Trump. This is not a political thing. Okay, yes, I'm very kind of excited about talking about this, but this is not a political thing. I've had this up here before he became president. It became very clear when he started running for president, before he became president, that he had this disorder. And all of a sudden, narcissistic personality disorder became a lot more popular in psychology. And we started talking about it more because we realized, oh my God, we have a perfect case, perfect example of narcissistic personality disorder on our hands. That's the problem with Donald Trump right there. That is why he has all those problems. Okay, he is mentally ill, and I'm not saying that because I'm trying to make a political statement. That is what the experts believe. Okay, but then again, he doesn't agree with the experts because he knows better than all the experts, and that's the problem. Okay, here's another one for you guys. There's also antisocial personality disorder. Oh, by the way, narcissistic personality disorder, a lot more common in men than in women. And here's another one that is more common in men than in women: antisocial personality disorder. This is the type of personality disorder where basically you disregard other people's rights, you violate the laws, and you basically do whatever the hell you want. You deceive, you lie, you manipulate, right? You're irritable, aggressive. And here's a key thing. These people lack remorse. They do not feel bad for their victims. There's an image there of Richard Ramirez. He was a serial killer. Okay, a serial killer. Killed a bunch of people before they finally caught him. By the way, they caught him around my neighborhood, around where I live. Okay, came to East LA and they kicked his ass right there. and they captured him. But he killed a bunch of people, okay? And if you've, I heard the interviews, the documentaries, the guy is basically cold-blooded. He does not feel bad for anyone. He is fearless. He's not afraid of anyone. And he basically was just this serial killer. And by the way, antisocial personality disorder includes people who are psychopaths and sociopaths. I don't know enough about Richard Ramirez's history to know if he was a psychopath or a sociopath, but a psychopath is someone who is born this way, who's born incapable of feeling bad for others. And because of that, they are dangerous. They'll lie, they deceive, they manipulate, they're irritable, aggressive. They're not all in jail, by the way. Some of them are functioning in society, okay? But it also includes sociopaths. Sociopaths are the ones that have a really rough life, a lot of neglect and abuse and mistreatment. And because of that, they became horrible people that are now antisocial. But they're not all in jail. They're not all serial killers, okay? They're not all murderers. And not all murderers are this way. Some of them are just murder people for other reasons, for money. There are some who are functioning normally in society, who are functioning in society. It could be, you might have a boyfriend that's like this. These are the ones that you consider to be a serious, to say the word, a serious asshole who will do whatever the hell he wants, when he wants, doesn't give a damn what you think. He doesn't feel bad that he mistreats you or hurts you. By the way, they will pretend to feel bad, but they don't. They'll pretend to love you, pretend to feel bad for you, and they do not. Okay? It can be a congressman. It can be a senator. It can be a president. And I'll give you guys something to think about. There are psychological experts, there are experts out there who believe that Donald Trump also suffers from this. Think about that. Read that and tell me if that sounds like Donald Trump. Disregard for other people's rights, disregard for the law, deceiving, lying, manipulating, being irritable and aggressive, lacking remorse, being incapable of saying, I'm sorry, I did something wrong, or I was wrong. Think about that. Does that sound like him too? There are plenty of people who believe that that's also Donald Trump. And I'm telling you this because I'm telling you that, in my opinion, there is somebody mentally ill who is leading this country right now. And I'm not saying this is a political statement. This is psychology. This is why I'm telling you this. And it is a very dangerous thing. He will not concede the election. He will not admit that he lost, and he's ready to start a war, to start chaos if he has to stay in office, because he's narcissistic. He will not follow the law. He will not follow the rules. He'll do whatever the hell he can to stay in power. And if this was not the US, if we didn't have checks and balances, if we didn't have the Senate and Congress and other governing bodies here, we would be in for some serious trouble. We're lucky this is not Russia. Okay? And I'm telling you this, and some of you may not like this, but I'm telling you this as a psychologist. It is dangerous to follow people who are mentally ill. And that is why I believe what we have. Okay, let's keep going. Okay, because we're almost done. Right, it should not just be about Donald Trump, but I think it bears repeating and to make that point very clear to you guys. Okay, it's a very dangerous time, very dangerous situation we have right now, and hopefully it'll all work out and there'll be a peaceful transfer of power. But we'll see. Okay, he's not giving up. There are also childhood disorders. These you've heard about as well. Let's see how we're doing on time. Yeah, I need to speed it up. We're almost done. Childhood disorders. Attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. You've heard about it. ADHD. Two key symptoms here: inattention, right? They're careless. They have difficulty listening, difficulty concentrating. Okay. Short attention span. Okay. Hyperactivity, impulsivity, fidgeting, can't sit still, etc. ADHD kids drive their teachers crazy. They can't sit still. They'll be climbing trees. They'll be talking all the time and just losing things. And they do tend to have problems in school because they can't control their behavior. Can't pay attention for very long. That's ADHD. You've all heard about it. I could tell you more, but I spent too much time talking about Donald Trump. Okay. Autistic disorder. Autism. You've all heard about this too. This has been in the news a lot lately. 3 key symptoms of autism: impaired social interaction, impaired communication, repetitive behavior. Okay, the impaired social interaction is where they don't take an interest in other people. They won't look at other people. They won't develop normal friendships. They seem to be in their own little world. Impaired communication, lack of speech. They often will not talk to others. If they can talk, they often will not talk. A lot of them have trouble with speech and they have trouble pronouncing words. Okay, and they just have severe problems with speech. Repetitive behavior, rocking back and forth, gazing at the ceiling, or other things. My son is on the autism spectrum, and yes, it's harder to get his attention. He's mild though. He's level 1. There's like level 1, 2, and 3. Impaired communication, yes, lack of speech. He doesn't really talk to others so much. He doesn't say what he wants. You have to ask him. You know, doesn't really make friends at school, right? Repetitive behavior, the wanting to swing over and over again, ride his bike over and over again, wear green over and over again. You see this in children who are autistic. And it's not, and by the way, now we call it autism spectrum disorder. There's a whole range of this. There's different kinds, okay? And my son is mild. He does have this. And yeah, he's getting treatment for it. Last one over here, there are also sexual disorders. Now, I can tell you a lot about sexual disorders. I have taught human sexuality, but I'll just tell you a little bit about it just so you're aware that they do exist. There are sexual problems. And by the way, they're mostly due to anxiety and stress. But in men, it takes the form of erectile dysfunction where they can't get it up. There's also premature ejaculation. It's also usually due to fear, stress, anxiety, okay? In women, it comes in many forms. Sexual arousal disorder, they can't get sexually aroused. Orgasmic disorder, they can't have orgasms, okay? Sexual pain disorder, they experience pain during sex. Why? It's psychological. They're afraid of sex. They are so anxious about it that they tighten up and then sex hurts. They can't have an orgasm. They can't get aroused. It is a psychological problem. Here's the thing though, there's plenty of medication to treat this now in both men and women that can help you perform better sexually, although the problem is psychological. If you deal with your anxiety problems, your stress problems, maybe you're in a bad relationship, a bad marriage, and that's what's causing your problems, and you need to be in a healthier relationship, and then you'll be able to, you know, perform better. But that is it, you guys. We'll stop there. I know we only have a few minutes for discussion, and I said some things that were provocative, but I'll stop recording.